Welcome to the debate. So it's what, February 2026. And I want to start with a scenario. One that might sound impossible, but is, well, it's actually the inevitable conclusion if you just look at the data in front of us. Imagine a world where the screen just vanishes. The black glass rectangle that has been the center of your life for, what, 15 years. Your bank, your map, your television, it just disappears from your hand. Now, you have to ask yourself, is that a nightmare or is it liberation? Because if you look at the stagnation in the smartphone market, and if you look at the billions of dollars flowing into so-called ambient computing, the industry has already made its choice. They are actively trying to kill their most profitable product.
Kill is a very strong word, though.
It is, but I think it's accurate.
Is it? I mean, kill implies a sudden death. I would argue they are just desperately trying to find a sequel to a product that has already reached, perfection. We aren't seeing a vanishing act. We are seeing a saturation point.
I think it is more than saturation. It's a fundamental rejection of the upgrade cycle. Look at the numbers. In Japan, the average user is now waiting nearly 5 years to replace their phone. In the United States, that number has crept up to 38 months. The excitement is frankly dead. The innovation is, it's purely incremental, a slightly better camera, a slightly faster chip. But the central question we are debating today isn't about sales figures. It is about the architectural shift happening underneath those figures. Are we witnessing the death of the smartphone era and the rise of smart glasses and neural interfaces? I argue that yes, we are entering a post-smartphone world where technology becomes invisible, finally liberating us from the tyranny of the screen.
And I'll argue that liberation is just the latest Silicon Valley euphemism for total surveillance. I believe the smartphone is the ultimate form factor for visual information, precisely because it is contained. While the hype around wearable AI is, I admit, deafening right now, abandoning screens for neural interfaces or smart glasses ignores fundamental human biology. We are visual creatures who crave high-resolution feedback, and it introduces ethical hazards that we are nowhere near ready to handle. The smartphone isn't dying. It is becoming the reliable, boring engine of our lives, and that's a feature, not a bug.
The boredom is exactly why the shift is inevitable. Human beings naturally gravitate toward the path of least resistance, and the smartphone has become a high-friction device. To understand where we are going, we have to look at the Cold War breaking out between the biggest companies on Earth. You just cannot look at the roadmaps of Meta, Apple, and Google without seeing this concept of the invisible puck.
Right, and that's the developer term floating around for the headless phone, correct?
Exactly. The invisible puck theory posits that the smartphone as we know it, a device we stare down at, is shrinking into a purely utilitarian processing hub. You keep it in your bag, maybe your pocket. It supplies the 6G connectivity, the localized Llama or Gemini AI model, and the raw compute power. But the interface? The interface leaves your hand entirely. It moves to your face via smart glasses or into your ear via hearables.
So your argument for the death of the smartphone is that we still carry a smartphone, but we just stop looking at it? I mean, that sounds more like a peripheral discussion, not a paradigm shift. It creates a distinction without a real difference. You're still carrying the brick.
It is a fundamental shift in human behavior and social dynamics. It is the liberation from the head-down lifestyle. Look at the strategic maneuvering over just the last 12 months. Apple significantly scaled back production of the Vision Pro. Why? Because it was an isolation chamber. It was heavy, expensive, and it cut you off from the world. Now contrast that with the massive success Meta has found with the Ray-Ban smart glasses. They prioritized everyday wearability over high-fidelity immersion. This proves the market doesn't want a computer strapped to their face. They want a lightweight layer of intelligence that lets them look through technology rather than down at it.
Okay, but you are conflating a successful accessory with a primary computing device. I grant you that the Ray-Bans have found a niche. They're stylish, they take photos, fine. But let's look at the reality check from the actual user base. There is this prevailing sentiment in the development community that humans are, for lack of a better word, addicted to high-bandwidth visuals. Audio and ambient tech just cannot replicate the information density of a high-resolution OLED screen. You mentioned the invisible puck, but that whole concept assumes people want to give up the visual richness of a phone for a voice in their ear or some monochromatic heads-up display.
They aren't giving up richness, they are gaining context. The screen demands 100% of your attention. The puck architecture allows the internet to exist as a layer of context.
But at what cost to control? Current smart glasses have severe limitations that, physics dictate. Users are reporting battery life that barely survives a morning commute if they use the cameras and AI features actively. Translation features, which are often touted as the killer app, fail miserably in real-world noise. But more importantly, there is a trust gap. You're asking people to replace a device they can physically put away in a drawer with a device that sits on their face, recording everything they see. Or, in the case of Neuralink, inside their skull.
We should probably separate the biological interface from the optical one because the timeline differs, though the destination is the same. Sticking to the glasses, this is currently a high-stakes chess game for our senses. You have Google pushing Android XR with Gemini deeply integrated. Amazon is deploying smart glasses in logistics, not for style but to increase productivity by overlaying data on packages. And look at Meta's aggression. They have effectively bought their way into the eyewear monopoly by acquiring a massive stake in EssilorLuxottica. These aren't just R&D projects anymore. This is the industry betting the farm on contextual AI. They are building a future where the internet isn't a place you go to, but a layer on top of the real world.
And that layer is often broken or invasive. You mentioned Amazon's logistics, okay? That is a controlled environment where efficiency is the only metric that matters. In the wild, contextual AI often misreads the context. Meta's own users are flooding forums with complaints about hallucinations and audio descriptions. But my biggest issue is navigation. You cannot seriously argue that a voice telling you to turn slight right is superior to a visual map.
Navigation is actually the perfect use case for the ambient shift. It highlights the friction of the current era.
How? If I am in a complex intersection in Shinjuku or Manhattan, I need to see the geometry of the road. I need to see exactly which exit to take.
But think about the friction of the current method. Google's Live View on phones is a miracle of technology, sure, but it requires you to hold your phone up in front of your face, like a tourist while walking down a busy sidewalk. It is dangerous, it is socially awkward, and it blocks your peripheral vision. It makes you a target. Heads-up displays in glasses allow you to keep your head up. You see the directional arrows overlaid on the pavement. You are actually engaged with the environment, not a map.
Engaged with the environment, or are you engaged with an overlay that a corporation has placed between you and the environment? You're looking at an ad for a coffee shop floating in midair, not the street. You are just trusting that the overlay is accurate. When you look at a map on a phone, you are consulting a tool. When you wear the map, you are submitting to a system.
Situational awareness. And this brings me to the killer use case that usually bridges the gap from niche to mainstream: accessibility. This is where the invisible puck becomes a lifeline.
This is where the tech has the most merit. I'll admit that. The potential is undeniable.
It's more than merit. It is revolutionary. We're seeing smart glasses change the lives of the blind and low vision community right now. Services like Be My Eyes are collaborating with hardware makers to allow volunteers or AI to see through a user's glasses and guide them through airports or grocery stores. We have X-Ray Glass providing live captioning of the world for the deaf. For these populations, the smartphone was always an imperfect tool because it required hands and eyes. The wearable removes that barrier. It is the first time technology has truly adapted to the user, rather than forcing the user to adapt to the screen.
For the blind, for the deaf, for those with color vision deficiency, absolutely. The utility is profound. But we're debating the death of the smartphone for the general population. You are taking an edge case, albeit a vital and noble one, and extrapolating it to the mass market. The average teenager or office worker does not need live captioning of their reality. They want to watch TikTok.
But the edge case always becomes the mainstream use case. Texting was created for the deaf. Voice control was created for accessibility. High contrast modes became dark mode. The benefits always trickle up.
Fair enough, but those features were absorbed into the phone. They didn't replace it. My concern with the mass adoption of always-on wearables is this concept of smartphone dependency syndrome. We have studies out of Canada and Denmark confirming that smartphones have created these dopamine loops and dependency. Now you want to replace a handheld addiction with an interface we can't put down? If the device is on your face, the slot machine mechanic doesn't go away. It just becomes part of your vision.
You are effectively strapping the slot machine to your eyes.
I disagree fundamentally with that interpretation. The slot machine mechanic is tied to the visual scroll, the infinite feed of content that requires active engagement. Ambient computing removes the scroll. You don't doom scroll on smart glasses. You ask a question, you get an answer, you move on. By removing the screen, we actually reduce those dopamine loops and force the user to be more present. The friction of the interaction changes from mindless consumption to purposeful query.
Or we simply become less autonomous. We're just outsourcing our memory and our navigation to a whisper in our ear. Which brings us to the ultimate outsourcing, the chip in the brain. You mentioned the post-smartphone era. Well, Elon Musk has predicted that Neuralink will replace smartphones entirely by 2030. That is 4 years away. That is the ultimate conclusion of your invisible puck.
It is an aggressive timeline, I'll grant you, but the logic holds. The primary bottleneck of the smartphone era is bandwidth. And I don't mean 5G.
Bandwidth. We have gigabit speeds in our pockets.
Not data bandwidth, input bandwidth. Communicating with a phone by typing with 2 thumbs is laughably slow compared to the speed of human thought. We're limited by our motor skills. A brain-computer interface, or BCI, allows for high-bandwidth interaction. We are talking about controlling your digital environment at the speed of your neurons, writing an email just by thinking it, navigating a UI by pure intention. It is the removal of the final barrier between intent and action.
Speed is not the only metric that matters. This is where I draw a hard line. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has officially classified this technology as an AI hazard. That is not a designation they use lightly.
They classified it as a hazard because it is nascent and unregulated, not because of realized harm. All transformative technologies start out as hazards.
No, they classified it as a hazard because the privacy violations are irreversible. This is the difference between the phone and the interface you're advocating for. If your phone is hacked, you buy a new one. You change your passwords. You wipe the drive. If your brain interface is compromised, the stakes are existential. We are talking about the potential to read neural spikes related to intent or emotion. The smartphone allows for a distinct separation. There is me and there is the device. Neural interfaces blur that line in a way that creates profound ethical risks to human autonomy.
It is a risk, certainly, but technology has always moved toward lower friction. The jump from a command line to a mouse was about friction. The jump from a mouse to a touchscreen was about friction. The jump from a touchscreen to a neural signal is the logical next step in that reduction. The history of computing is the history of removing the barriers between the user and the information.
Logical for efficiency, perhaps fatal for privacy. And let's be real about 2026. We are still in early human trials. The idea that billions of people will trade their iPhones for brain surgery in 4 years is fantasy. It just ignores the visceral human aversion to invasive procedures for the sake of checking email faster.
It might not be billions immediately, but look at the stagnation we discussed at the top of the show. People are bored. The invisible puck concept bridges that gap. You keep the phone in your pocket for the heavy lifting, but you use the high bandwidth interface, whether it's glasses or eventually a BCI, for the interaction. If you offer someone the ability to communicate telepathically, effectively, with their devices, that is a value proposition that overrides privacy concerns for a lot of people. We gave up our location data for Google Maps. We will give up our neural data for telepathy.
It is a compelling value proposition for a sci-fi novel. In reality, we are dealing with physical waste. 5.3 billion phones were discarded in 2022. That is a mountain of e-waste. If we shift to wearables, are we just creating a new pile of junk? Are we solving the environmental crisis or just compounding it?
Actually, I believe the shift to the invisible puck in wearables could help solve the e-waste problem.
That seems completely counterintuitive. You're adding batteries to glasses, to rings, to watches. You are multiplying the number of devices per person.
But the compute hub, the puck, doesn't need a screen. It doesn't need the latest camera sensors every year. It doesn't need to be thin and made of fragile glass. It can be a robust, long-lasting brick that you keep for 5, 6, 7 years. The end of the upgrade era that we're seeing in Japan and Europe suggests people want longevity. A modular system where you keep the compute core but maybe swap out the cheap fashion frames is far more sustainable than tossing a glass sandwich every 2 years because the battery died or the screen cracked.
That is an incredibly optimistic view of hardware manufacturers who rely on planned obsolescence for their stock price. If Apple or Samsung moves to a puck, they will find a way to make you upgrade that puck every 24 months. They'll throttle the chip or change the connection standard. But okay, let's look at the market right now. You mentioned the Cold War for senses. Google, Amazon, Meta. Who's winning?
Right now, Meta has the momentum because they pivoted to fashion first. They understood that if you want people to wear a computer, it has to look like a pair of Ray-Bans. But the sleeping giant is ecosystem integration. If Apple releases a pragmatic pair of glasses, not the Vision Pro, but something lightweight that pairs seamlessly with the iPhone, that's the tipping point.
But that brings us right back to my central thesis. Apple's glasses would pair with the iPhone. The phone is still the anchor. Even in your invisible puck scenario, the puck is just a phone without a screen. The centralization of data, the connectivity, the processing, that is the smartphone's legacy. It isn't dying, it is just going undercover. The processor is still the king.
But the distinction matters. If the screen is no longer the primary interface, society changes. Social interaction changes. If I am talking to you and I can pull up information about our conversation in my peripheral vision without breaking eye contact, that fundamentally changes the nature of human connection. It allows for a superhuman level of recall and context.
It certainly does. It means I never know if you are actually listening to me or if you're reading a Wikipedia article about me. It introduces a permanent uncanny valley to face-to-face conversation. It destroys the authenticity of the moment because one party is always augmented.
Or it means I can understand you better because real-time translation is happening seamlessly. I can see your name if I've forgotten it, sparing us both embarrassment. It augments reality rather than replacing it. It allows us to be smarter and more connected without the physical barrier of the device.
I see the utility. I really do. But I come back to the AI hazard designation. Whether it is glasses recording everything we see or a chip reading our neural spikes, we are surrendering the last vestige of private experience. The smartphone, for all its faults, can be turned over on the table, it can be left in the other room. Ambient computing is designed to never be turned off. It observes the world right alongside you.
But aren't we already there? We carry these tracking devices everywhere. They listen for Hey Siri or OK Google. They track our location history. At least with ambient computing, the utility matches the intrusion. We get seamlessness. We get the wearable web.
And that is the question I think listeners need to ask themselves. As Graham Patrick wrote in that piece on the post-smartphone era, would you give up your phone if you could wear the web instead?
It's a question of trade-offs.
It is. And I think the trade-off of losing the high-resolution, private, controllable screen for a surveillance-heavy, always-on wearable is a bad deal. I want to choose when I connect. I want the friction. The friction is what keeps us human.
I see it as the natural evolution of tools. We used to carry maps and calculators and cameras. The phone swallowed them. Now, the environment is swallowing the phone. It is dissolving into the background.
We shall see. But let's look at the travel industry again because I think that's a microcosm of this transition. You mentioned the Comédie Française using smart glasses for translation. That's a controlled environment. It is. But look at the expansion. Smart glasses are being used for navigation in airports like Zurich and Gatwick. They're being used to translate menus instantly. These are the friction points of life. The smartphones solve them, but clumsily. You have to stop, unlock, open an app, wait for it to load, point the camera. Wearables solve them fluidly. That fluid interaction is why the era of the smartphone is ending. The friction is just too high compared to the alternative.
I will concede that for specific tasks, navigation, translation, the form factor of glasses is superior. But for the vast majority of digital life, consuming media, reading long-form text, analyzing complex data, the screen remains king. You cannot edit a spreadsheet on smart glasses. You cannot appreciate high-end photography via a Neuralink. Well, not yet. We are not entering a post-smartphone era. We are entering a smartphone plus era. The phone remains the sun in this solar system.
For now.
But as we look toward 2030 and we look at the pace of AI, I believe the screen will become a legacy interface, a fallback, just as the landline became a fallback for the mobile phone.
And I believe the screen will remain our primary window into the digital world, precisely because we can choose when to look through it.
We have covered a lot of ground today, from the stalling sales in Japan and the US to the rise of the invisible puck. We've analyzed the Cold War between Meta and Apple.
And the very real risks associated with Neuralink and the privacy nightmare of always-on cameras.
As we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. The age of staring at your hand is ending. The technology is moving to your body and eventually, perhaps, into your mind. The future is ambient. It is technology that translates, guides, and assists without demanding your full attention. It's a scary shift, yes, but I think it is also a liberating one.
That is one view. My closing thought is this. While the form factor may change, the concept of the smartphone, a visual central computer, is not dying. It is adapting. And we should be very, very careful about rushing from a device in our pocket to a chip in our brain. That requires a level of trust in tech companies that, frankly, has not yet been earned. The AI hazard designation is there for a reason. Sometimes the best feature of a device is the ability to put it away.
A fascinating point to end on. Thank you for listening to the debate.
Thank you.
Trace where the signal leads next.